Oh, the universe made itself from nothing, the Big Bang. There was nothing and it exploded, and here we all are, we're a cosmic accident. Billions of years later, here we are. All by natural processes. There's no need for God. Is that science? Who saw it happen? Well, that's a bit of a hint, isn't it? Nobody saw it happen. But you know that people think about the whole science and the Bible thing and think about evolution. And yes, it is evolution, but it's evolution with a big E. What do I mean by that? It's how everything came to be by natural processes, not just living things, biology. I mean, Darwin's famous for his ideas about biology, but it really goes back before Darwin. There were people before Darwin, and they weren't necessarily atheists, although some were, but they were people who they believed in a divine cause for the universe, but not the Bible. They hated Jesus. And you see some of these people around today, they're called deists. And the Masonic Lodge, for example, are deists. They hate Jesus, but they believe in a creator, but not the Bible. And so these people were hell-bent, if you like, on destroying the Bible's message. How do you do that? Well, at that time, back in 1800 and thereabouts, and before then and after then, people believed that the Bible's history was reliable. When it says God created everything in 6 days, the seventh day rest, that was a week. I mean, God himself said it was in Exodus chapter 20, verse 11, wrote on stone that he created everything in 6 days and rest on the seventh. So did God get it wrong? I mean, he was there and did it. So this history, and then if you go to Genesis chapter 5 and Genesis chapter 11, you've got these genealogies there. You know, when you read your Bible, you do the whole Bible, you get to those passages, think, oh, that's a bit boring. I'll skip to that. Have you done that? They're actually not boring because they give the history of the world from the beginning. So you've got the creation, Genesis chapter 5, you've got up to Noah, and from chapter 11, you've got Noah through to Abraham. And we can graph that like this because it gives the birth date of each of the ones mentioned and how long they lived for and how old they were when they had their next one in the list. And so you can graph it like this. So the length of the bar is how long they lived for. Some of them live for a long time, much longer than we live. Like Methuselah, everybody learns that in Sunday school. Well, 5% of kids that go to Sunday school these days learn that Methuselah lived for 969 years. Ooh, that must be some sort of story. That can't be right, can it? Nobody lives that long. But many people before the flood lived to be those sort of ages. He was just a little bit beyond the normal. And then after the flood, you notice there the length of the ages they lived declined. Interesting, isn't it? Now, you graph those ages, you get a very interesting graph, and this is what the graph looks like. And this is the generations after Noah, right through to Anna, who's I think 7 generations after King David. So you get all these ages, how long they lived for is recorded. So the generation time after Noah, there's decline. You know what that says? Mathematics tells us these numbers are not made up. They're real. They are real. You can actually graph it by the calendar date, and it's not such a good graph. Why might that be? Because it's actually, we think, it's a genetic basis for the declining longevity. There was a genetic bottleneck at the time of the flood, and we think genes were lost, which allowed for longevity, and then we had this rapid decline in the ages that people lived after the flood. In the past, people have thought it was sort of changing the environment as sort of some sort of canopy or something or other that protected and made the world a lovely place to live, and then after the flood it changed, but in fact, Noah still lived to be quite some hundreds of years after the flood. So the environmental change doesn't explain it. It's got to be a genetic change. Something happened. And of course, God ordained that something would happen at that time. So this whole evolution idea, evolution with a capital E, It's not just about apes changing into humans, that's part of the story, but it's this false history of the world which imagines that we've got these billions of years of time. And they thought back in the 1800s, early 1800s, they thought all they needed was like 20,000 years and they'd disprove the Bible, because people understood the Bible's time frame was about 6,000 years total. In fact, in the 1800s, Bibles were printed with the age of the earth. Like 4004 BC was when the creation occurred, and that was written in the Bible. Because it's clear from the genealogies and the time frame of creation, this is clear, you can actually add it up. Now, I've not always believed that. As a Christian, I thought I had to believe in the millions of years. And so I thought maybe the days are long periods of time, or maybe this or maybe that, or maybe even God might have used evolution in some way to create everything. But I came to understand that doesn't work. And there's no need to do that. There's no need to disbelieve the Bible. And this sort of data shows you that these figures are real. They're not some sort of thing. I sort of imagined maybe there was some sort of change in the number system or something rather that changed these dates, you know, like, and people have proposed those sorts of ideas. But no, these numbers are real, and people believed they were real until relatively recent times. So there's evolution with a big E. This is Michael Roos, who was Professor of Philosophy and Zoology at Guelph University in Canada, and he was an atheist, but he said this. He said, evolution therefore came into being as a kind of secular ideology, an explicit substitute for Christianity. So evolution is not how God made things, it's how it happened without God. That's the whole point of it. And this guy, Julian Huxley, is head of UNESCO for many years, said this. He said, in the evolutionary pattern of thought, that's evolution with a big E, there is no longer neither room for the supernatural. The earth was not created, it evolved. So do all the animals and plants inhabit it, including our human selves, mind and soul, as well as brain and body. So religion. So we invented God, God didn't invent us. This is the ethos which permeates our schools and our universities today. The kids are taught this even from ABC play school, preschool, like before they even get to school, taught this story about how everything came to be without God. I've got a water bottle here somewhere which I think I'll need. No, my water bottle's disappeared. If someone get me a glass of water, that would be great. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you, Leslie. Thank you. Just my lovely wife, Leslie. Say hello to her later. So this is an alternative atheistic history of the universe which has no room for God. And a lot of people in our country have got the message, because this is portrayed as science. It's a scientific understanding how everything came to be. And Mark McCrindle does research in trends in Christian things in Australia as well as secular things as well. But McCrindle research found this in 2017, that over half of Australians, 53%, say that science and evolution is an issue that blocks their interest in Christianity. In fact, 1 in 3 say it blocks them significantly or completely. Now, there's nothing about what I'd call experimental science which blocks their faith, and I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. It's the false history that doesn't match the Bible's history that actually causes them to disbelieve the Bible. And this is like 50% just in the general population, so it blocks them. But we also find that in the churches, very few churches actually prepare their young people for this sort of thing. They don't do anything about it, unlike this church. And consequently, they go off to be fed to the wolves when they go to senior high school, university, and so on. And they lose a lot of them lose their way. The studies in the United States suggest that anything between 66 and 88% lose their way. Southern Baptists reckon it's 88% lose their way. Raised in Christian homes, Christian churches, but they lose their way. So our sister ministry went onto the campus of Kennesaw University in Atlanta, which is the Bible Belt in the United States. If you've been to the US, there's a Baptist church in every corner in Atlanta. it's just amazing, actually. Anybody been to the Bible Belt in the US? The Southern Baptists, you know, they're okay, aren't they? They believe the Bible, teach the Bible, but not enough of them teach this stuff. Not enough of them. So they found 100 young people raised in the church, mainly Baptist churches, as I say, not Catholic churches. 100 people raised in the church, and then they asked them, which is true, creation or evolution? What do you think the answer was? 5 believe in creation. 100 young people raised in the church. So the next question was, were you taught about creation, evolution, how to deal with this at church or even at home? 5 were taught, the 5 who believed it. And then, are you still attending church? What do you think the answer was? 6 still attending church. 94% dropout. Pretty devastating, isn't it? There's good news here. Teach them and they'll stay, by and large. Now people say, oh no, it's not nothing to do with that, it's sin. Sin draws people away. Well, that's like saying aircrafts crash because of gravity. Not all aircraft crash because they've flown properly and designed properly, etc., etc. And the thing is that, yes, sin is ultimately the cause of the falling away, but what about the ones who stayed? Why didn't sin drag them away? Because they were taught about it. And this guy, Cornell University, William Provine, he said this. He said, evolution is the greatest engine of atheism ever invented. He's an atheist. Evolution is the greatest engine of atheism ever invented. What they teach in our schools? Big E, evolution. And this is a typical feedback we get. Kenneth, he said, I was raised in the church until my teens before rejecting it, declaring myself as an atheist and agnostic. Creation evolution issues are the number one sticking point for me. How could I possibly believe the Bible if it was wrong from the very start? And family got him materials from Creation Ministries International and shared them with him, and he came to understand where he lost his way, came to faith in Christ, said thank you and God bless. This billboard says it all. This is the atheists putting up money in the United States to put up these billboards to say, praise Darwin. Darwin's just a shorthand for it, big E evolution. Praise Darwin, evolved beyond belief. Well, Big Bang. Billions of years ago there was nothing and it exploded. 13.8 billion years ago they were saying, and just recently the James Webb Space Telescopes found all sorts of stuff that shouldn't be there according to their Big Bang model. And so some of the cosmologists said, well, let's double the age of the universe. Just like that. Just let's double it, double the age of the universe. So how solid is the 13.8 billion years? It's not. And this guy is a cosmologist in the United States, and he said cosmology may look like science. This is the idea of the Big Bang and billions of years of the evolution of the universe and everything. Cosmology may look like science, but it isn't science, says James Gunn at Princeton University, co-founder of the Sloan Survey. Sorry, I've pressed the button here. A basic tenet of science is you can do repeatable experiments, and you can't do that in cosmology. We don't have another universe or multiple universes to do experiments on, and we couldn't do the experiments anyway. So it's not science. Science is about experiments. See, you think about science, you've got experimental science and historical science. And students don't get taught this at university. It is a valid distinction which a number of atheistic scientists have even themselves said this distinction is valid. But they don't get taught this. And so what they get taught is a lot of good experimental science. You know, there's amazing discoveries about medicine and curing disease and preventing disease, and all sorts of technology like we're using tonight comes out of science, experimental science. And there's amazing inventions and discoveries being made all the time. But this involves doing experiments in the present that you can repeat. Now, it's not infallible because it's run by humans, but you can repeat the experiments, and someone else can repeat your experiments and say, hang on a minute, you got that wrong because you missed this, you know, and you can, you know, refine it and improve it and so on. But historical science, what's that? Well, you get a guy with a fish fossil and he says, this is in Nature or Discovery magazine, or lots of journals and things, and he's got this fish fossil, and he says this fossil belonged to the fish which to grow legs and walked out in the land and became our ancestor 300 million years ago. They're the stories, you see, and they're just put together in the same science course as all the wonderful experimental science, as if it's the same stuff. And students think, oh, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius at sea level. Fish evolved into land animals 300 million years ago. It's the same stuff. It's not. You can't do experiments on what happened in the past. And this is a sad thing, that so many people recognise that if you've got hundreds of millions of years of time, where can you put that in the Bible? And because it's hundreds of millions of years of animals struggling and struggling for survival, dying of diseases and killing one another and so on. So you think about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and here they are and everything's very good. God said it was very good when he finished creating everything. Where can you put all that time? It has to be under the feet of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Death, disease and suffering over hundreds of millions of years before Adam and Eve, before sin. Before sin brought the corruption of the creation. It undermines everything. I didn't think about that when I was trying to believe that you could fit it together. And oftentimes, in fact, I tried not to think about it. I just buried my head in the sand, tried not to think about it. Because I think in my heart I knew it didn't work. You see, go over to the New Testament, Romans chapter 8, verse 22, the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now. God didn't create it groaning and suffering. It became that way because of sin, Adam's sin. Adam thumbed his nose at God, said, I'm not going to do it your way, do it my way. God warned him that if he did that, the death would come. Death, suffering, struggle for survival came about because of sin. But the creation itself will be set free from its slavery to corruption. How? That's what Jesus did. He came to redeem the whole of creation. Yes, we, the lost race of Adam, redeemed through what he did on the cross, his death and his resurrection. He paid the price for our sin, which is death. But the whole creation is to be redeemed. It's going to be new heavens and new earth, because this one's corrupt because of sin. But if it's already, you know, if you try and blend the two together, you've got hundreds of millions of years of death, suffering and disease before sin. What did sin do? Nothing. So why did Jesus die on the cross? It undermines everything. And people know that it undermines everything, and that's why they're shut off from even listening to the gospel. So, how do we understand the rocks and the fossils and things after Adam and Eve, not before? And that's what unlocked it for me, was to realise the importance of Noah's flood in understanding the rocks and the fossils under our feet. In fact, Derek Ager wasn't a Christian, but he was at Swansea University in the United Kingdom, professor of geology there. He wasn't a Christian, but he said Noah's flood, the great catastrophe of Noah's flood, was long seen as the explanation for most of the phenomena of the rocks, especially the fossils they contain. In fact, geology originally was built upon the framework of the Bible's history and the flood. Nicholas Steno is famous as a geologist, 1631 to 87, a bit before my time. He's famous. He said the fossils are the remnants of once living organisms. That was a sort of a novel thought. People thought they were just put in the rocks to start with, you know. They were created with the fossils in them type of thing. But no, see, the fossils are remnants of once living organisms. The stratified layers, were laid down in water. The layers without fossils are the primeval creation. So think about sort of creation week. That's the rocks with no fossils in them. The layers containing fossils are laid down during Noah's flood. And his prodrome, a book he wrote, marked the birth of geology as a science, especially stratigraphy, understanding the layers and how the layers form. What happened? Well, these deists got involved, right? The people that hated the Bible, hated Jesus, got involved. And this guy, James Hutton, who was a gentleman farmer in Scotland, the Scots have got a lot to answer for in this, by the way. I've got about a third Scottish ancestry, so yeah, but my ancestors didn't do a good job, I tell you. So he erased the flood. He said the past history of our globe must be explained by what can be seen happening now. Do we see a global flood happening now? No? Well, we can't talk about it. That's not science. We can only talk about things that we can see happening. Well, did he see that happen in the past? No. But he's saying we've got to only use processes we can see happening now to explain the past. So here's what he said. It must be explained. What's happening now? No, I said there's a sort of half-truth here, because you can study what's happening now with science. So he said, to make it scientific, we can only use what we can see happening now, to explain the past, which you can't see. See the trick? And he got traction with his idea. He got traction. This is 1726. It was about late 1700s he wrote and published these ideas. Now, this fulfilled a biblical prophecy. In fact, in 2 Peter chapter 3, we read there, knowing that this, first of all, that scoffers will come in the last days with scoffing, following their own evil desires, so sinful desires. They will say, where is the promise of his coming? Where's the promise of Jesus coming? Where's Jesus coming? For ever since the fathers fell asleep, all things are continuing as they were from the beginning of creation. For they deliberately forget, or deliberately overlook, this fact, that the heavens existed long ago, and the earth was formed out of water and through water by the word of God, and that by the means of these the world that then existed was deluged with water and perished. I learnt that in another version of the Bible, so I'm sort of struggling when I try and read out this one. Scoffers will come, scoffing, following their own sinful desires, and say, where is this coming? And it says they deliberately forget, or they deliberately overlook, they're willfully ignorant, is another version, of the fact that God created everything out of water. How are we told the earth started out of water? It was a hot molten blob and cooled down over hundreds of millions of years. So if the Bible told you that God created it as a hot molten blob, you know what they'd say? It was covered in water. Anything to contradict the Bible. But the Bible says the Bible was covered in water, and by the waters, those waters, the world was deluged and destroyed. So they're willfully ignorant of this. And this is what we see happening in the last 150, 200 years in geology and geography and right across the board. And out of that flowed biological evolution. So Darwin's thinking was affected by this sort of thinking. And then he followed on and said, well, if all the rocks and everything formed by natural processes, maybe life formed by natural processes. And so he took it that a bit further. And it was not a local flood. This is something that I, as a struggling young Christian at university, tried to believe that Noah's flood was a local flood, because you see, you learn all about the geology, about the rocks and the fossils, how they formed over millions of years. So where's the evidence for Noah's flood? Well, it didn't happen. Must have been a local flood, but it wasn't a local flood. You've got to think about, read the Bible. Why would you need an ark if it was a local flood? You could emigrate. Doesn't make any sense, does it? The need to have animals on the ark, they could emigrate. They could migrate. The need to have birds on the ark. I mean, birds, they could fly to another country in a couple of days. I mean, they fly from Canada through to Tasmania, you know, in migrations. Like, the purpose of the flood was what? To blot out mankind. Were all the people living together in the local spot? Bit hard to believe, isn't it? The duration of the flood, 371 days are on the ark. Long time to be on the ark for a local flood. Jesus said the flood came and destroyed them all. Was he wrong? He believed it really happened. All people descended from Noah's family. That's what the Bible tells us. All people descended. Is there any evidence for that? There is. Genetics today tells us we all came from Noah's family. Well, it tells us we came from a family. For a start, Noah's 3 sons are the ancestors of all nations. That means that their Y chromosomes we have. The men, not the women. We're not going down that path, you know. If you've got a Y chromosome, you're male. And the Y chromosome DNA, you can sequence it today, and you can sequence all the men around the world, or samples of all the men around the world, and guess what? It all points back to one man. And here's the diagram that shows that. Y chromosomes of the world. And right there in the middle is Adam, ancestor of all people. And mitochondrial DNA is inherited through your mother. So if you look at the mitochondrial DNA, it's a little loop of DNA in the mitochondria, which is part of the cell. And you look at the mitochondrial DNA, sequence that all around the world, you find that it goes back to one woman. Funny about that, isn't it? In fact, it also shows there were 3 descendants of that one woman that we all relate back to. Who might they be? There were 3 daughters-in-law of Noah, weren't there? That would be the 3 daughters-in-law that you can see there in the mitochondrial DNA. And here's the conclusions from this research. You can look up the paper there if you want to do that later. These trees, that's called a tree, that diagram, the tree of the Y chromosome and the mitochondrial DNA. And our additional analyses show that multiple haplogroup founders were surprisingly closely related, suggesting a small population that underwent explosive population growth, that's after the flood, giving rise to all the human chromosome Y and mitochondrial DNA groups around the world. There's no reason to reject a literal historical Adam and Eve. The genetic data are pointing strongly in that direction. In fact, the data we see are exactly what you would expect from the historical account of human origins. The data are exactly what we'd expect from a biblical account of human origins. So what about the local flood idea? Well, there's a rainbow promise. So has God broken his promise? There's a rainbow would say there'd never be another global flood. Been lots of local floods, never again. What about all the high mountains were covered? So there it is, all the high mountains under the whole heavens were covered with water. That sounds like a local flood, doesn't it? No, of course not. And just imagine a local flood that covered all the high mountains locally. Think about that. Would that be a local flood? Think of this as a cartoon here illustrating the idea. It just doesn't make any sense. And Noah's Ark was massive. It was a huge boat. It could estimated to carry 15,000 tonnes, 15,000 small cars. It's massive. So it's a bit of overkill. And by the way, the shape of the ark has been shown by naval architects to be ideal, to be stable, not tip over. So where'd they get all these millions and billions of years from? Well, they said, look at what's happening today. There's a little bit of sediment forms. How do we explain the rocks and the fossils without Noah's flood? So they think about the slow action of erosion and sedimentation, and then they have to extrapolate that over huge periods of time and you end up with the millions and billions of years idea. And because of the small amount of sediment, just a sand, silt, mud deposited each year, supposedly, because of the small amount in this thinking, how would you get fossils to form? Because to form a fossil, you need to bury it. So there's quite a few fossils up there in the table up there you can have a look at later from Michael. He brought those in for you to have a look at. Most of them have been collected around here. There's actually a couple there from Green River Formation in the United States. But look at the preservation. We'll talk more about that. But because of this idea of this tiny amount of sediment formed each year, Darwin said no organism wholly soft could be preserved. So think about jellyfish. Could you get a jellyfish fossil? Because if a jellyfish dies, what happens? It disintegrates. You know, in the waves, it just breaks up and falls apart. And to get a jellyfish fossil, you have to bury it with a heap of mud. But there's not a heap of mud to bury it with, because you see, they've got the millions of years idea, means there's a tiny amount of sediment. So here's a fossil of a jellyfish. Cambrian, supposedly, that's like 500 million years ago. And here we find the same thing living today. As far as we can tell, it's the same creature. Where's the evolution? That's another story. They're called living fossils, in fact. But the point is here, you must have quite a bit of sediment to bury that, even with its tentacles and everything all in place and everything. It hasn't been squashed even. So, fossil ripple marks. Have you ever been on a mud flat? You don't see it on the beach so much, but a mud flat where the tide comes in and out, like up at Cairns, you'll see ripple marks formed from the water coming out and in. How long do they last? Till the next tide, and they're gone. Here we have ripple marks. They're not unusual. They're very common right around the world through the rock layers. Ripple marks. What have they got to do? You've got to bury them before the next tide in quite a bit of sediment. Otherwise, if it's just a little tiny millimetre of stuff, the next tide will wash it away. Get the picture? We're talking here about the evidence that things had to be lots of sediment, not tiny amount. How about this? This is an ichthyosaur in the process of giving birth, 2 metres long. How much sediment dumped on it to preserve it in the process of giving birth? Lots of mud, rapid burial. Another thing you find with the fossils, mixtures of sea creatures and land creatures. This is marine and land creatures buried together. Dinosaurs, dead. Exhibit A for evolution, aren't they? Go into this Queensland Museum there and you've got Muttaburrasaurus in all its glory. There in the foyer, it tells the kids about how many millions of years ago this was, and all the school kids get dragged along to see these things. Oh, they're fascinated by them and they read all the signs and indoctrinated. Look at this. This is actually, see the curved neck of the dinosaur? Strange, isn't it? Do you know if you've got something like a long-necked bird, like a swan, and it drowns, it does that. Back the neck. Because the ligaments that hold it normally in its normal position, when that dies, they actually they relax, and then you get this bending of the neck. Again, how much sediment to actually bury this all intact and everything like that? Lots. Now, this gives the lie to the millions of years. This is a reality check on the millions of years. So we got an average of, this is what's called the Phanerozoic, which is the fossil-bearing sediments around the world. So it's the strata or the layers with fossils in them, right? So they're called the Phanerozoic. And it's 2.2 kilometres thick on average, the depth of it. And they put a time frame on this of 541 million years. So, well, how much sediment is that each year? You divide 2.2 kilometres by 541 million. You get your phone out, you can do it. But I've done the calculation for you. It's 1 millimetre in 250 years. And it's full of fossils. Is this some special magic they've got working for them? In fact, it doesn't even fit their own idea that we look at the present to tell us about the past, because presently in the ocean is about 10 millimetres per year of sediment. Not enough to form much in the way of fossils, but again, the present processes don't explain the fossils. But 10 millimetres, and they're talking about 0.005 millimetres per year if this millions of years is correct. I said, oh, well, no, hang on, we've got actualism these days. I mean, we recognise that things have to be buried to form fossils, so we have this section here was formed really quickly. Well, you've got an even more bigger problem for the rest of it because you've got less time for the rest of it. How could any fossils form? The millions of years of fiction. People say, but hang on a minute, we've got radiometric dating, we can date these things. They stick a rock in a machine to measure its age. No, it doesn't work like that. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. So there's the fossils. The fossils tell us that there's been rapid burial. Globally, rapid burial. Not 0.005 millimetres a year, like 250 years to get 1 millimetre. That just doesn't cut it. So what about the rocks? We can look at the fossils, look at the rocks. So there's a story about the rocks. And the Grand Canyon illustrates it. Like, for example, look at what a little bit of water did over a long period of time. That's the standard story, right? Or take a different approach. Look at what a lot of water did over a short period of time. Well, I think the evidence stacks up for the second view. Look at what a lot of water did in a short period of time. So this greyish layer at the top called the Coconina sandstone up here, this grey layer is called the Coconina sandstone, covers over 500,000 square kilometres in the United States, and it's 100 metres thick. Large-scale water-laid rock formations. How do we know it was laid down underwater? Well, you can see sand dune structures within the rock. You see the man's head here? Just gives you the scale. We talk about quite a few metres. So this is sand dunes flowing over one another that actually form this structure, and then it's frozen in time in the rock. And it's sort of illustrated by this sort of diagram. And all around, we see this in the Sydney sandstone, for example, north of Sydney. You drive up to Gosford, Newcastle, and the cuttings there, when they're all fresh, you could see it. These, they're called crossbedding, it's called. You could see it in the Sydney sandstone as well, but you see it all around the world. And so this Coconina sandstone, how did it form? In a matter of days. We talk about currents of water like up to 200 kilometres an hour and a couple of hundred metres deep, flowing sand in these sand dune structures and depositing it over 500,000 square kilometres. We're not talking about local effect here, we're talking about a global flood. In fact, if you go down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon, there's a thing called Tapete sandstone, and you find these, they're called graded sequences in the geology, but you think about gravel, for example, big boulders, for example, get deposited first, then you get gravel deposited, then you get sand deposited, then you get mudstone, and you got limestone, and so this great gradation in particle sizes from coarse through to fine, and they're called megasequences. And the Sauk megasequence has the Tapete sandstone in it and covers this part of the United States, but it goes right through up into Alaska, right across into Greenland, and you can find the same sequence in North Africa. Global flood. In fact, there are 6 of these megasequences which are global in extent, and they cover the whole of the Phanerozoic. This is the fossil-bearing section of the geologic column. Here's a diagram of this. 6 megasequences. You've got these are the different names of them here, and you've got the flood happening here, and then you've got the recessive stage of the flood here with the TJAS. And in fact, the Green River fossils up there, the fish fossils there, almost certainly formed in this section here, the TJAS. Receding forward. So we've got one global flood, rising sea levels with retreats, with effective tides, as well as the tectonic movements and things that are happening. Recessive stage would be the TJAS. This is diagrams put together by Dr. Tim Clary, a geologist with the Institute for Creation Research in the United States. He's done a lot of research on this, looking at all the geologic records and things and correlating all the different sequences and things, a massive amount of work. You say, well, you're going into a bit of detail tonight. Yeah, well, you can blame Jay for that. He wanted in-depth stuff. So we've gone into in-depth in the rocks. The rocks speak of Noah's flood. They speak of what the Bible talks about. We can get more information, and we can only deal with a certain amount of information tonight. You couldn't sit here long enough, and I couldn't talk for long enough. Where you go? Well, creation.com. Easy to remember. You all know about creation.com, which is a treasure house of information about all these things to do with creation, especially the first 11 chapters of Genesis. There's a video there about dinosaur bones and Noah's flood. So we use dinosaurs to teach children the truth about the real history of the world. That's what we do. 6 days out of 7 there's new material goes up on the website. There's videos, there's articles, there's children's articles, there's in-depth articles, there's 6 days out of 7 new material. How do you keep up? We put out a digest every 2 weeks of the material, some of the more interesting material that's been on the website in the last 2 weeks. The digest is called Infobites. And here's a couple of examples of Infobites recently. I put this one up to remind me. We produced, the last 2 years we've been involved in producing videos for social media. You know, where it's all happening on social media. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, etc. And so how do we get the message to people? We've got to get it there. And so we've done these videos. And in TikTok and Instagram, which is where all the young people are, you can only have a minute. Which suggests what? Young people can't think for more than a minute? Not really. If they're interested, they'll spend hours playing video games and things, won't they? If they're interested, they'll stick with it. So we create all these 1-minute videos, but also a longer version which gives you more in-depth teaching, and hopefully people can switch from the 1-minute teaser and go off to YouTube and watch the longer version. God's blessed us amazingly. It's over 210 million views of those videos has happened in the last 2 years. Wow. Over 210 million. So God's blessed us. It's just been amazing. So how can you know about that? Get Infobites. And each 2 weeks you just get a reminder. Here's the latest videos that have gone up. This is what's happening. This is how many views they've had, etc. Share them with people and get the message out. This one here deals with the claim that the human eye is poorly designed, which is laughable, but anyway. But atheists take that sort of stuff on board. How can you get Infobites? Well, there's a form that looks like this. Evan and Wendy, you've got those forms there. There's a QR code there you can scan with your mobile phone and do it the high-tech way, or you can do it the old-school, cool way and write down your name, email address and information there. Why do we want your postcode? Well, that's so we can throw rocks on your roof. No, we can't do that. It's so we can tell you about stuff like tonight, okay? So we don't tell you about things in Perth, but we tell you about things that are relevant to you. So there's also, you notice the book tables at the back there, and I'll just mention a couple of those later on, but Creation Magazine's the #1 resource to get Creation Magazine. Who gets Infobites already, by the way? So probably several people already, God bless you. So use the opportunity to share some of the articles with people that you know would be interested. So what would be this question of radiometric dating? That's the idea that you can take radioactive elements in the rocks, like uranium and thorium and potassium and carbon-14, and you can take these and you can measure the amount of the parent material, the amount of the daughter material, and get a calculation and work out how old it is. That's the sort of idea. Well, it's not like measuring the temperature of water. It's you have to assume a history to do the calculations, and there's very strong evidence the history doesn't match their assumptions. But carbon-14 is actually very good evidence against our millions of years. Carbon-14. I think you wrote an article about that, didn't you? Not that you can recall. I might be recalling wrongly. Anyway, here's the deal. Carbon-14 is taken up by living things because carbon dioxide, a little tiny amount of it's got carbon-14, the radioactive carbon in it. And so when we eat food, the plants have taken up the carbon dioxide and made food out of it. We eat the plants, or the animals eat the plants, and we get the carbon dioxide, the carbon in us, and that carbon becomes our bones and our flesh and everything else. And then while we're eating, we're getting fresh amount of carbon-14 added to our bodies, that matches the decay. But when we die, we stop eating. Most people do. And when you stop eating, you stop taking in carbon-14, and consequently then it decays. So the decay of the carbon-14 then means that over time there's less and less carbon-14 resident in your corpse, or in the tree, or whatever it happens to be, in the shellfish or whatever. But here's the thing: carbon-14 decays relatively quickly. 5,730 years for half it to disappear. It doesn't disappear; it changes into nitrogen. So, if you've got something which is 100,000 years old, or specifically or especially if it's supposed to be millions of years old, it could not contain any original carbon-14. It has to have decayed away to nothing. Okay? So get the picture? If you've got something millions of years old, it can't have carbon-14 in it unless it's contamination recently. That's the problem, because right across this period with all these fossils, all these different bone, wood, coal, marble, all these things have carbon-14 above background levels consistently. Shouldn't be there if those millions of years are correct. If this is correct, there should be no carbon-14 in any of these fossils or any of these sources. It's there because the millions of years are fiction. Okay? That's just to show you that when they talk about millions of years, what about carbon-14? It contradicts the millions of years. Something else about the rocks. There's more evidence of rapid formation. These are tree trunks found in the rock layers. They're called polystrate because they cross multiple strata. And Derek Ager, the guy Professor of Geology at Swansea University, United Kingdom, said if one estimates the total thickness of the British coal measures about 1,000 metres, laid down in about 10 million years according to the evolutionary idea, then assuming a constant rate of sedimentation, it would take taken 100,000 years to bury a tree 10 metres high, which is ridiculous because it would have rotted away. So you get the problem? He goes on to say, alternatively, if a 10-metre tree were buried in 10 years, which is sort of what you've got to have to preserve it, then that would mean 1,000 kilometres in 1 million years, or 10,000 kilometres in 10 million years, that is the duration of the coal measures. This is equally ridiculous. We cannot escape the conclusion that sedimentation was at times very rapid indeed, and at other times there were long breaks in sedimentation, though it looks both uniform and continuous. Here's the thing. All around the world we see rock layers bent. So they've been laid down horizontally, but then they've been bent. See it in mountain ranges all around the world. This is one in Grand Canyon. It's exposed in the Grand Canyon there. And you can see the person for scale? Is that supposed to be over there? I don't know why it moved there. But there's the person. See the person? So look, it's quite a big fold we're talking about here. Now, the evolutionary idea is, yes, they recognise these folds all around the world, and that means there's a lot of tectonic forces involved, and they've got this idea that, well, you see, it was buried under lots of burden, overburden, which created pressure, and the pressure created heat, which made the rock more labile, more softer. It sort of softened the rock by making it hot, and so that's how it bent, right? Because if you've got hard rock, can you bend it without it cracking? No, you can't. So they got this idea it must have happened deep down, lots of heat, which would then change the nature of the rock because it actually would be so hot it would change the nature of the rock. It's called metamorphosis, metamorphic rock. Well, Dr. Andrew Snelling, geologist who believes the Bible, he applied to the National Park in the United States to get permission to collect samples to do research on this, to look at the rock under a geological microscope and see whether it has been changed by heat. They refused him permission. He's a creationist. He might find something we don't agree with. They took him to court, and the court forced the national parks to give him the samples because it was viewpoint discrimination under the US law, not allowed. So they're forced to give him permission to get the samples. Got the samples, and he found that the rock nature in the fold was no different to over here away from the fold. What does it say? There was no heat involved. There was no transformation of the rock involved. The rock was soft when it was bent. Now here's the problem. The bending is supposed to have occurred 480 million years after the rock was laid down, in which case it would be totally, well and truly solid rock. Problem for the evolutionary, big E evolution idea. So Dr. Snelling showed this very clearly, monument fold it's called, and quoting from him, he said, both the macroscopic and microscopic evidence, that's the macroscopic, what you can see there, I just showed you. The macroscopic evidence is there's no cracking, there's no evidence of any, it has to be soft when it was bent. That's the macroscopic evidence. Microscopic evidence under the microscope are conclusively consistent only with soft sediment deformation, in other words, soft when it was bent. Before cementation or lithification, before it became hard, the Tapete sandstone had to be folded while still relatively unlithified, not rock, but soft, soon after deposition and before cementation and lithification. Thus, nearly 500 million years of claimed geologic history are eliminated. What did we find there a while ago? We had, with our carbon-14 dating, carbon-14, 600 million years of time eliminated. You don't have to apologise for not believing they're millions of years. The evidence is there if you would see it. So this, as Dr. Snelling said, thus nearly 500 million years of claimed geologic history are eliminated. Just like that. You look at things like landforms. This is Three Sisters, west of Sydney in the Blue Mountains. They make sense of, if we think about the recessive stage of the flood creating these landforms, it makes a lot of sense. But it doesn't make sense in a millions of years story. You look at this, this is a canyon formed and people saw it happen. If people hadn't seen it happen, they might imagine this creek here took millions of years to carve this canyon. But people saw it happen, and it happened in less than a day. It's called Little Grand Canyon because it's sort of a small model of Grand Canyon, but it was near Mount St. Helens volcano on March the 19th, 1982. A mud flow flowed down the hill and carved out the canyon in less than a day. See how, if we weren't there to see what happened, we can be quite wrong in our assumptions. What about this? Who saw it happen? Nobody. But they assume that the little Megalong Valley creek down the bottom here, way down the bottom is a little tiny creek down there, carved that big valley over millions of years. Really? Does it make sense? The receding stage of the flood would form sheet flow. This is when the water's coming off the land initially, and the sheet flow would create the plateaus, which we see all around the world. Because it only happened 4,500 years ago, those plateaus are still there. They're not eroded away. And then as the water gets down to the point it has to channel, there's a little bit of a dip in the land, the water has to channel, and it all runs into the dip, and the dip rapidly becomes eroded out, and you end up with the channel flow creates the valleys. And you see this, once you get this in your mind, you can't unsee it. Everywhere in the world you see this, because the flood was global. Monument Valley, United States is famous. This is Mises here. You can go onto Google Earth and fly around these things, and you can see that the top of this one here, and the top of this one here, and the top of this one here, and over there, they're all the same material right across. Just down a bit lower here, so it makes the ones in the foreground look a bit higher, but Same material, so it was obviously once joined right across all these things, and, well, there's something that eroded out the material in between. In fact, something planed it off flat on the top, and then something took out the material in between. See, Noah's flood explains it. Explains the plateau, explains the removal of the material in between. In fact, it's interesting. Where's all the material gone in between? Where's it all gone? It doesn't just dissolve. It's washed away. It's probably in the oceans today, the ocean floor. So we've done a bit of a deep dive into the rocks tonight. I hope it's been a bit of eye-opening for you to see some of the evidence that the Bible's history can be trusted. Not because I can prove it. It can be trusted first off because it's God's word, and God doesn't make mistakes in inspiring his word. But when we take the Bible and we go out and look at God's world, start to think about it in the context of what God's word tells us, it actually makes sense of what we see. It actually makes sense of what we see. So what's happening today? So many people think that science has disproved the Bible. George Barna, the American researcher, but he's spread his wings into Australia and New Zealand and other countries, and he says that 2 in 3 Christian teens do not intend to continue attending church after they leave home in Australia and New Zealand. Why not? Because they don't believe it. They've taken on board what they've been taught at school and university, and they don't believe it. So we need to make sure that they understand some of the evidence for what we're talking about tonight, that they can trust God's word and they can stand tall and don't apologise for doing that. And of course, with other things too, like the resurrection of Jesus, the evidence for the resurrection, and so much like that, we need to be talking to our young people about the evidence for our faith. Not just assume because we talk about it that they believe it, but the evidence for our faith. So who gets Creation magazine? God bless you. I hope you share it around. You don't just sit on it, because it doesn't do any good getting dust on your bookshelf. After you read it, share it, because it does, people's lives are changed by reading a magazine like this. It's colourful, it's attractive, it's full of interesting information. We get lots of feedback from people about magazine. Louise from Canada said, "This magazine's cleared up questions I've had since I was a kid. And I thank you for this fabulous work. I would have devoured it as a kid. Now I read Creation to my kids." So Leslie and I have raised 3, they're now adults. The youngest one's 41, but strong Christians. And I think we worked out between us, between all of us, we've been 34 years at university, because I've got 2 PhDs, two of our kids have got PhDs, and the other one's a veterinary surgeon. And between all of us, we've done about 34 years at a university. Strong Christians. So it's not inevitable that you lose your faith when you go to university, if you know what you believe before you go. That's the important thing. Jeremy says, "Your writings played a big part in me becoming a Christian. My older brother got me a subscription to Creation magazine about 6 years ago." So it's where the rubber hits the road. Is the Bible reliable? So you can get Creation magazine tonight if you don't already subscribe. You can get a 1-year subscription. You can get a 2-year subscription. And I suggest you think about a 2-year subscription, because all these extras come with a 2-year subscription. For a 1-year subscription, you get a back issue of the magazine. What did I do then? For a 1-year subscription, you get a back issue of the magazine, but for a 2-year subscription, you get all these bonuses. Okay, you get a back issue, that's that one, plus you get the Voyage That Shook the World documentary, which we produced, get a subscription to the Journal of Creation, get the booklet, Is Human Life Special, the Creation Survival Guide for students going through school, university, 15 Reasons to Take Genesis History, Stones and Bones, a great presentation of some of the basic evidence that God created things like the Bible says. So, that's it for Creation Magazine. You can sign up the back table, and 2-year subscription, you get all those bonuses. So, highly recommended. But you can get a 1-year subscription, that's fine. A couple of other resources before we have some questions. Answers book answers over 65 questions. I'm sure with question time I'll be able to say it's in the answers book, but I'll try and give you an answer anyway. Relevant to what we're talking about tonight, the Creation Answers book has lots of stuff about Noah's flood, evidence for flood, there was a global flood, etc. Lots of things in the Answers book relevant to what we're talking about tonight. Age of the Earth, radiometric dating, Biblical Geology 101, directly relevant to what we're talking about tonight. Haven't talked about biology. I'm a biologist by background, but look, I can destroy evolutionary ideas about biology very easily. It doesn't stack up today. What we know from experimental science just contradicts the whole idea that accidental changes in things could make life. You know, everyday discoveries are made which show it's phenomenally complex and sophisticated. And even a humble bacterium is way beyond our ability to imagine how to make it. We can copy it, but far beyond our ability to imagine how to make it to start with. Exploring Geology with Mr. Hibbs, lots of children's books and things. Christmas coming up soon, might be an idea there. So again, geology speaks of Noah's flood and the age of the earth. The True Story of the World from Beginning to End, designed for young children. Again, Jesus said the flood was real. Just as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the days of the Son of Man. They were eating, they were drinking, marrying, being given in marriage until the day that when Noah entered the ark, the flood came and destroyed them all. Jesus is talking about a flood, a judgment in the future, a judgment for sin. And so just as they were going about their business in times of Noah was a preacher of righteousness, urged people to get on the boat. They laughed at him. Only 8 people were saved. But in the future, it'll be like that. People will be going about their business, if nothing's going to happen, and the judgment will come. So the big picture here from the Bible is an original world, which was very good. It was paradise. The intrusion of sin brought death, disease, and suffering into the world. As it says in Genesis chapter 3, cursed is the ground because of you. Jesus comes as a redeemer to redeem the whole of creation and to pay the price for our sin, which is death, by dying on the cross for us, the perfect Son of God. Raised from the dead, having conquered death. And there'll be coming again in the future when there'll be new heavens and new earth, and there'll be no more death and suffering. Anybody looking forward to that? Sorry? Hallelujah. Hallelujah. I'm looking forward to it. I broke my leg a few months ago and it's been a struggle. Neck of femur fracture, I don't recommend it. Any questions? Anybody got any questions? I can't see.
I'll give a little testimony.
Yes, thanks Warren.
First up, 40 years ago was the first time I saw a Creation magazine. I never believed evolution before then anyway, because my first interaction was high school science book and the picture of a fish supposedly falling to the
bottom of the sea.
Yes, and fossilising. I thought, what a load of rubbish. So fast forward about 20 years, a Creation magazine presented itself and I straight away found my way down to you good people, and then how many years after that? About 30 years later, I was working there for a couple of years, and that's since changed. So that's my testimony to the power of the Creation magazine and how it was for me in my journey. The question I have for you, Don, is about world population today, and how can we extrapolate back from that to get to zero?
Yeah, so in fact, I wrote an article about this, and Dr. Rob Carter and somebody else wrote a more technical article about it. There's several ones. I think the title of my article, Where Are All the People? I think that's the title of the article. If you look at 8 billion people on the earth today and say take a very conservative population growth rate of just 0.5% per year, you can only go back to 4,500 years or so, time of Noah's flood. You can't go back 100,000 years. If you had 100,000 years with no Noah's flood or anything, then you would have wall-to-wall people. I mean, people think the Earth's overpopulated, but actually it's not. There's vast stretches of the Earth that are virtually uninhabited, and not just inhospitable places either. So we in Australia all live in these coastal cities, but there's vast tracts of land which are virtually uninhabited. So yes, the population of the earth today points back to a biblical time frame. It doesn't need 100,000 years even, just 4,000 or 5,000 years to get all the people we have today. And as I said, genetic information, genetic data shows we came from came from one woman and one man, which is of course what the Bible tells us. I thought somebody had a whole fistful of questions.
Obviously, you move around probably within Queensland, visit a lot of churches, a lot of places.
Yeah.
How do you feel about currently just within the church where a lot of ministers just don't believe in literal six-day creation, and which way is it trending?
Oh, I wish I knew an answer to that. Which way is it trending? I mean, there's sort of glimpses of hope and there's glimpses of depression, you know, like it's sort of variable. One of the problems is our theological colleges, you know, there's a couple that are good, but most of them are pretty hopeless. And they're just... The problem is that they regard themselves as academic institutions, and if you're going to be part of the academy, you've got to play by the rules of the academy. And the rules of the academy are that when the geologists say the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and we accept that, you see, because we're part of the academy, and it's rude to disagree with them, see. And so the theologians think that if they, you know, kowtow to all the anti-biblical stuff that they've, you know, thrown at them, and that they agree with all that and say, oh yeah, but God did it all, then the geologists and the cosmologists and those people, they're going to respect their expertise in theology, you see. So the reciprocal respect idea. But they don't. The cosmologists and the geologists and things pat them on the head and say, go play with your toys, boys, we're not interested. Because they know the Earth, everything just made itself, you know. It's no need for God. You're just playing with rubbish over there, guys, and you're a waste of time. So that's the problem, and so the theological colleges try to skirt around this. In fact, I heard of one here in Brisbane that doesn't even deal with the first 11 chapters of Genesis. They leave it out as if it's not in the Bible.
Look, I'm a simple man. If we as believers just can't identify that the God of creation spoke it into existence, then, geez, I'd be raising doubt in my head that he can actually keep his promise of keeping my soul when it dies, if you know what I mean. I find the step of believing 6 days literal creation quite easy, if you know what I mean, when we also trust him for our very souls. And if we can't do that, I find it difficult to divorce literal creation or believing in the biblical creation story. I just find if you can't believe that, then you're on a bit of shaky ground, that's all.
Yeah, where do you stop?
Correct.
So, in my own experience, as I said, as a young Christian, I got saved at the age of 10 when I heard a street preacher, and back in those times there was no television, and so I didn't have any exposure to evolution until I got to high school. And year 10 in high school, they come on full hard on, especially about the millions and billions of years, and then to a lesser extent biological evolution, but it was mainly about the millions and billions of years when I look back through the textbook. So the 1962 was in New South Wales. The atheists have been trying to get this for like 30, 40 years, and they finally achieved it in 1962, where they got the curriculum in New South Wales to incorporate teaching of evolution to everybody in year 10 in high school. And I was already a Christian, so I got hit with this, and how do I deal with it? So, and I asked pastors, and they were totally useless. They had no idea. They suggested the gap theory. You heard of the gap theory idea? Between the first couple of verses of Genesis, there's this time there where Lucifer came and flooded the earth and created all the fossils and things, and then in the 6 days of creation, God decided to recreate most things, but he decided dinosaurs weren't such a good idea, so he didn't recreate them, etc. And I thought, man, if you think that solves the problem, you don't know what the problem is. So I didn't think there's much point asking any pastor about this. So what did I do? I had no answers, and I just tried not to think about it. And but it affected my faith, and it wasn't until, God brought across my path a number of influences over a number of years. It was a slow transition from being confused about this to actually accepting what the Bible said. But in the end, it was actually hearing a scientist from the United States, Dr. Dwayne Gish, came and spoke at the University of Sydney at a lunchtime meeting, and it was the first time I'd ever heard a man of science defend believing what the Bible says in a straightforward manner. And I thought, wow, you mean you can actually believe what the Bible says and you don't have to, and so he recommended a book called The Genesis Flood. Genesis Flood was written in 1961 by a hydrologist, Dr. Henry Morris, and a theologian, Dr. John Whitcomb. And I ordered that book, and back in that time, 1970s, the books were so expensive compared to what they are now. And I sort of took a deep breath and ordered this book and paid the money and had to wait 6 weeks. It's not like today with the internet, you can get something like that. And finally got that book, and I read the book, and it blew me away. I hadn't been thinking too much about Noah's flood, except I thought it was local flood, because I'd accepted the millions of years idea. And the Noah's flood explains the rocks and the fossils without millions of years. In fact, the actual existence of the rocks and fossils contradicts the millions of years. And the bending of the rocks and all that sort of thing. And so, I was on this journey, sort of from totally confused to, hey, you mean there's a way of thinking about this? And then eventually, over about 12 months, 18 months period, thinking through the issues, and then in the end, I was praying one day and reading my Bible, and this thought came to me in my head. It was such a strong, powerful thought. Are you going to believe my word, or are you going to believe the words of men? And I said, Lord, forgive me, help me to believe. Change my attitude from trying to make God's word say what I think it should say to actually believing what it says. Does that mean I understand everything in the Bible? No. I mean, there's difficult things. I don't understand everything, but I work at it. And in eternity, I might understand it all, maybe. Maybe I won't even be bothered by it then. But things like, people say, oh, how can God create, in 6 days, thousands of years ago, when we see starlight comes in billions of years away, You say, well, how do you know it comes from billions of years away? Well, the scientists measure the blah, 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 and James Webb Space Telescope and all that. And so how do you know that the light travels needs that time frame to travel? I mean, it could be instantaneous. You could be seeing them as they are now. In fact, some of the problems with the James Webb Space Telescope observations would be solved if we're looking at those galaxies as they are now, not as they were supposedly 14 billion years ago or 13 billion years ago. Mm. If we're seeing them as they are now, it solves a problem for them as well, And then you hit upon it. I mean, it says in the Genesis chapter 1, God spoke things into existence. Yeah. So how do we understand how God speaks things into existence? No. So God spoke the stars into existence. I don't understand how he did it, but we can see all those stars and everything. I don't think Adam had to wait for a long time to see all the stars.
That was a Big Bang theory, wasn't it? God spoke, bang, it happened.
Yeah.
No,
So yeah, I share your frustration, absolutely. And our young people are really missing out on so much because of the lack of teaching about this. And also, pastors are losing their way because they're unsure of what they believe. I spoke in England, and a pastor came to me and shared with me his journey. In fact, Leslie and I had dinner with the pastor and his wife before I spoke, and he said, I'd almost given up on pastoral ministry. I actually almost resigned my pastoral calling to go and do something else. And he said, and I heard a talk like we talked about tonight, sort of about believing the Bible, about evidence for creation. And he said, I realised where my life had gone wrong. He said, I was believing all this academic stuff about the age of the earth and evolution and everything, and trying to marry that with the Bible, and then it just didn't go together, and I'd almost given up my faith.
Yeah, I don't know how they do it, to be honest with you. It was one of the first things that I was confronted by. If I'm going to believe this, you had to have an emotional spiritual experience. But if you can't believe the first chapter or first few chapters, how can you wrestle with the rest of it? Thanks very much, Don. Appreciate it. I do have a question. So how are diamonds formed, and do they have C14 in them?
Yes, so dinosaur bones do have C14.
No, not dinosaur bones.
Oh.
Diamonds.
Oh, diamonds. Yes, diamonds have C14 in them, which is another...
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it?
Incredible. What's incredible about that? Well, diamond is a crystal structure where every spot is taken up by carbon, right? So that's what makes diamonds so hard and so valuable, especially for industrial stuff. And here's the thing, you can't put carbon into the diamond after it's made. Not possible. So the contamination idea that if you've got carbon-14 in diamonds now that are supposed to form billions of years ago, how can that be? Can't be. You can't contaminate them. So it has to be present in the diamonds when they're made, and that means the diamonds are not billions of years old. That means they're only thousands of years old, which would have been formed probably during creation week, during the formation of the earth.
Yeah. And we have a question up the front here. Just hold on.
Oh, sorry. Oh, hello. Just what you said about diamonds. I was in the high-end jewellery industry for a number of years, and I was fascinated, but I didn't have the nous to study gemology. I had no chemistry.
Yeah.
But I could understand how these stones were formed. And it's just another one of God's miracles.
Yes.
Is how they were formed. And it's even the corundums, which you would know, are not as hard as the diamond, but they still have similar structures. But you can't add carbon to them. And they've been trying to do that for centuries. They've been trying to heat, cool, trying to cheat people out of what is the real stone. And it is just rampant. It is so rampant. But that's not what I was going to ask. I have a real problem with people's footprints in stone. I don't see how that could happen. And there's more and more being released now. There's a place in Arizona, another one in Texas, that have been discovered with all these footprints of various sizes. And I can understand the weight of a dinosaur in mud, leaving that. But a human being, I just can't get my head around that one. It's the only thing I can't get my head around.
Oh, I think I've been on mud flats like up in Nullarbor and places like that. And I mean, you walk on the mud flats after the water's gone out from the tide, you can leave footprints, no problem.
Oh, right, right.
Yeah, absolutely, no problem at all.
I've never experienced that, but I must admit, I have never accepted the science.
I mean, when you do it on the beach, on the sandy beach, I mean, it tends to cave in. But you do it on a muddy flat, it tends to stay there until the next tide, and then it gets washed away. So, yeah. Yep.
I could never study science. My head just couldn't get round it. But I just looked at what you were saying tonight, especially about the flood and looking at the mesa in Utah.
Yes,
I always wondered, how come all the plateaus are the same?
yes, that's right.
And you answered that question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it's called geomorphology. What's that, Leslie?
I was going to say, tell them about the formation of the opals at Lightning Ridge.
Oh yeah, we could talk about lots of things. I mean, there's a guy out at Lightning Ridge, Len Cram, his name was, who he didn't believe the story about millions of years because he believed the Bible about the opals, and so he set about in his backyard, had a little lab, and he had all these Vegemite jars set up, and he figured that he reckoned that if he just got some of the mineral water and some of the sand from around Lightning Ridge and put them together in the right sort of proportions, that opal would form naturally very quickly. And he showed that. Within weeks, you can see the band of opal forming in his jar of just mineral water and sand from around Lightning Ridge. So, in fact, it's even been reported that fence posts have been partly opalised. So the fence posts aren't millions of years old, of course. So, but yeah, so just one of the many things where believing your Bible can actually lead to really good science. In fact, not believing the Bible ends up with a lot of misdirection in science. The number of people that have scratched around looking for ape men and stuff like that, and they never found them, and they never will. But they've got to make a story out of it, otherwise National Geographic doesn't fund them for more research. So.
Gold formation is a question I have. How does gold form?
I don't know, you might have to ask Taz Walker about that. Gold. There's actually articles on creation.com about gold formation. They're called placer, which is where the alluvial gold, you find alluvial gold like in rivers and things like that, placer deposits. And again, the evidence is they're young. So the studies that have been done indicate they're young. But just how gold forms, I mean, I couldn't say. It requires heat, of course, to melt. And
the guys that are
yep.
idea which was Mount Morgan.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're in trouble if they find out how to make gold. that would be
well, you
a
can't
disaster.
make gold because gold's one of the elements, but AU is a symbol for it. But you can't make gold. That's alchemy, which was popular in the past. The idea you can sort of take stuff which isn't gold, make it into gold. No, you can't do that. But
Can we give Dr. Don a round of applause, please?
Thank you.
Hang around, buy some books, and can I encourage you to get the info bites as well? That is excellent.
Don't forget to sign up for Creation
Sign
Magazine.
up, and anyway, hang around, folks.
Anybody want to ask a question?